it feels like everybody's kind of aware of what's happening at the top of the draft when it comes to the Carolina Panthers. They're going to be taking Bryce Young, the overwhelming favorite to go number 1. We were talking with Albert Breer about what the Texans plan on doing at number 2, and CJ Stroud's name is still apparently in the conversation, and CJ Stroud could be the guy to go number 2 to the Houston Texans and be the second quarterback taken. But CJ Stroud did address the information that was released, his S2 scores that came out that was less than ideal in comparison to some of the other quarterbacks is the nicest way to put this. Not good at all. And he had the following quotes, this from the Detroit Free Press. CJ Stroud said, quote, "It's not an accident things come out. It's not an accident that people throw dirt on my name, and I definitely think that whatever that means, because people benefit from things, people don't, and I definitely know that who I am as a person, I'm going to continue to just be myself, so I know that it wasn't on accident, that it happened on purpose. I'm not dumb, but at the same time, I can still realize who I am, and I can just be myself. I'm a football player, not a test taker." Now, I don't know if he was directing that at Brady Quinn, but that was CJ Stroud responding to the.
What do I have to do with this?
I'm just kidding. It's a joke.
Okay. It's just another bad joke.
Yeah, listen, I got several of those. More to come.
The interesting thing about this is, I mean, he's right. I've never taken the S2 test, so I can't speak to that. But if it's a test for cognition and processing, you don't see any issues in his game in that regard. You know, as far as how he sees the field, how he reads the field, I think one of the things that was most noticeable breaking down his tape the past couple of years is you see a lot more full field reads. You see a lot more of him turning his back to the defense. Those are things you didn't see quite as much with Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields. So you kind of saw more of an evolution of the offense with CJ Stroud from a passing standpoint. And so from a processing and cognitive standpoint, you know, I didn't see any issues with any of that portion of his game. I mean, he really doesn't have any issues with his game. You know, the only thing you were questioning is whether or not he was mobile enough, and I think he answered a lot of those questions versus Georgia. So, I can't speak to the S2 test. The only thing I've been told is, you know, look, the guys who score well tend to do really well when they get in the league. The guys who haven't scored well tend to not. And I think that's the concern maybe for people who do buy into this test or put a lot of weight into it. And I think it's another reason why his agent, David Malugeta, has continually tried to, you know, protect him and put people out there and, you know, try to take shots at other people who've been critical. Because, you know, he feels like that's what he's doing, you know, for his client. That's what's in his client's best interest.
I just think in the end, you're always, and when I say I mean the media, there's always going to be people pushing for angles to speak on things. And it's interesting. I got into media because of the way I was covered. I was called a freelancer. I was called basically an athlete. I wasn't an intelligent football player. I was just a football player that was more athletic than everyone, which I always found that to be so interesting, that a narrative could be a person is so much more athletic than everyone else around them that they don't have to have any discipline, they don't have to have any knowledge, education, skill, or understanding of what it is that they're doing, because they're just that much more athletic than everyone else.
Must be nice.
I've always said, well, it's not true. There's not and maybe in an alternate universe that exists, but there's not one person that is playing. Like, first of all, if people understood what it took to be able to, one, gain the attention of recruiters and scouts to even go to play in the school. And then once you get to that school, the level of trust that or belief that coach has to have in the people that they choose to start. So when you're putting those people out there on the field, there has to be a level of trust and belief, because you're trusting and believing that this person isn't going to cost you your job, and in fact is going to help you, climb the ladder to being a higher coach, a head coach one day, and if it's the head coach, to keep your job. So there's so many elements that go into how you view your players. And so when you look at the position of quarterback and what their understanding has to be and what their knowledge has to be and just the development of a guy who is at the top, like, do you understand what it like? I just don't think people comprehend what it takes to be considered a top draft prospect. You can't, like, you can say, all right, they didn't do well on this test. Okay. We could say the correlation says that the ones who have done well on this test are going to do better in the league. Okay. They say that about, I think, the stat on graduates, the guys that have degrees, that they do better in the league. They tend to have better careers in the National Football League than guys that come out earlier or don't have degrees. But the bottom line is, at its bare minimum root, you are talking about the most elite person and people at the position in the world, period. So it's kind of like when you hear yes, you want to be critical because that's what, analysts do. That's what experts do. That's what insiders do. They collect the information. It's sensationalized and it's discussed and it's talked about and it becomes provocative. That's just how the needle is moved every single year. I think the only year that I can ever recall that there wasn't criticism of some sort going into the draft over such high prospects was RG3 and Andrew Luck. I don't recall anybody saying anything bad about those two quarterbacks. And I believe that might be the only year that, and me paying attention to the draft, that you did not hear craziness like something is wrong with these guys or here is something to look at. Here's a criticism to look at. I think that's the only year I did not hear people find a way to say something that was less than positive about the player. So if I'm CJ Stroud, I stay the course. I wouldn't even address this too much.
Agreed.
I wouldn't even address it too much because, to me, the more he addresses it, I like the fact that he's defending himself because he's in a forum where they're talking about him and his livelihood. But in the end, you are a football player, and you have proven that you're in the conversation and are going to be a high draft pick. So you know what? Stay focused in on that. Lean into the experience that you're going to have getting drafted, and let that serve as motivation.
It just like I see the quotes and I hear his comments, and it just strikes me as a guy who's playing the victim role because his agent gassed him up. Like in his that's what it strikes me as. And the reality is nothing he said is going to change or is going to help any team say, you know what, forget about the S2 score. What he said at some news conference in Kansas City getting ready for the draft, now he's all of a sudden climbing up our draft boards. None of it matters. Right. None of it has probably mattered for weeks. And the fact that he's responding to it, I'd give a canned answer, and I would just focus on getting ready for the fact that I'm going to be a top 5 pick. That's almost for sure. And possibly even a number 2 pick overall in the NFL draft tonight.
The other thing is you hear the buzzwords. You hear well, I'm not a test taker. I'm here to play football. And you go, all right. That was concocted by his agent and a couple of guys sitting in the room saying, how are we going to address this? Those sorts of quotes and things that come up like that. And there's nothing wrong with it. But to your point, people feel one way or another about him, and that's how they feel about quarterbacks in this draft class. So if they like him, they like him. It's not going to bother them. If it's the Houston Texans taking him at 2 or Indianapolis at 4. But if they don't, his response probably only provides more ammunition for them not to like him. That's how it kind of works, not only in the NFL, but just in society in general. It only makes you kind of more polarizing to a degree. People, and again, I don't even know how much teams really weighed into this. That could be a varying scale. Carolina, you hear they're really, into this S2 test. They believe it's a huge indicator of future success. Other teams probably go, it's part of it, but like I just said, which I'm sure no one's going to listen to when we chop this up and put it out on social media and make it controversial. But, as I said before, when you watch his tape, you don't see any issue with him processing and reading defenses and knowing where to go with the football. He's very much in tune with that. Ryan Day is a hell of a coach. He prepares his quarterbacks for all that stuff. So there's really none of that out there. So that's one of those where, look, when you implement a test, there's always going to be outliers and things that just don't make sense. And this might be one of those. A poor score on the test might not be an indication of anything, or a high score on the test might not be an indication of anything, depending on who the individual is. It's just one of the data points, and it's really hard to know how much you really need to read into it.